Welcome to Brickworks New York Design Studio. My name is Anna Tzannes, and I'm the Design Studio Manager here. Whether you are joining us in person or virtually, I would like to welcome you to our International Speaker Series of 2022. At Brickworks, our goal is to make beautiful, stylish products that last forever. Products that are innovative, modern, timeless, and durable, as you can see here on display. Our design studios worldwide represent the very best of Brickworks and is a demonstration of our ongoing commitment to the architectural, builder, and consumer communities. Our guest speaker tonight here from Sydney, Australia is Alec Tzannes, the founding director of Tzannes, an architecture and urban design practice. Alec has served as the Dean of the University of New South Wales Built Environment and is now an Emeritus Professor. His practice, Tzannes, has been recognised by 130 local state, national and international awards in architecture, urban design and industrial design. In 2014, Alec was made a member of the Order of Australia for significant service to architecture as a practitioner and educator and through service to professional organisations. Alec, I'd like to give you a warm welcome to New York and thank you for speaking to us all this evening.
My name is Paul Mankins. I'm a partner with Substance Architecture.
And I'm Mike Colleen, project architect.
We're Midwesterners, so we're very interested in sort of design that is direct. And so we're always looking for something that is simple, related to both the land, and then typically it's very related to the program or the kind of functional needs of the building.
We draw inspiration for the architecture from the environment that we're designing to. The owner wanted to provide a space that would allow the family to gather.
So they wanted a kind of a residential quality. They wanted it to facilitate a lot of site activities. So it's seen as kind of a trailhead, but also kind of a home base.
Part of the reason that we chose the ebonite brick was the textural quality, the color, the horizontality of the Norman size of the brick itself. It's a longer brick, it's linear. It emphasizes the length of the wall elements that are protruding out of the site.
It has a kind of metallic reflection that's, really, really nice. So, on one hand, it's kind of dark gray, and then in certain lights, it's almost blue. And so as a result, the horizontality of the building gets even more pronounced. And when you're laying that against the hillside, it becomes particularly beautiful.
The brick being the foundational element of that's inserted into the landscape kind of provided this timeless, enduring quality that the family was trying to sort of maintain as they move forward and grow older.
Well, thank you, Anna, for introducing me. It's my privilege to be here in New York and at this International Speaker Series. Firstly, for the series, because Brickworks have done so much in Sydney, resurrecting the brick industry, if you like, and creating opportunities for designers that have been not available for many decades. But also because New York, where I studied at Columbia and at the Institute for Architecture and Urban Studies, and from a city which I've learned so much. So I thought I'd title this talk Architecture at the Threshold of a New Era, because it's something we are all thinking about, and that is, what does the future hold, and how can we as architects and designers contribute to a better future than what we're seeing unfolding from our practices and values of the past. And to do this, I thought that I would talk about 7 projects, not so much to mine them in detail, but to try and extract from them ideas and design thinking and really outcomes that may be relevant today, and also where things perhaps are moving. And really to ask you yourselves, ask you whether we are in an era of change, which really means business as usual for me, because we really experience change all the time, or are we at a point where there's a change of era, and that means perhaps new hope for the future, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. It could mean a steady decline. And so how can we contribute to stopping that steady decline in our environment, in our equity, in our societies? I wanted to start with something important that's happened in Australia, but I think is happening in other countries who have significant pre-colonial or First Nations or Indigenous populations. What we have here are two diagrams on the left which are created from our First Nations people. On the far left is their view of culture in Australia as it is today, a view formed by their understanding of predominantly the Judeo-Christian religions and philosophies, not just those, which places man at the top of the pyramid, dominating, if you like, all other living beings. You'll notice woman just below that might be questionable. We're moving to equality, but not necessarily in income and other things. So this is their view of our value system, our way of thinking. Their view is what we call country-centred, what they sometimes refer to as caring for country. It's a very different view. It's not anthropocentric. It's around the land, around the environment, and the conservation of it in perpetuity. And in their view, we are just one of the living beings that occupies this land, for which we have to think about when we change it, when we make effects on it. And this idea of caring for country is now first and foremost in the minds of design thinkers, design selection processes, and design itself, meaning that we have to, when we're bidding for work, for government and corporate work, not so much small work, we have to address this change of thinking. And I see this as a very strong thing. Now, on the far right is a project that, in fact, Bob Stern published many years ago, which I'm not going to talk about in any detail, but it was prescient in some ways, because in 1985, I was selected to design a monument to the Federation of Australia, a country that was formed in 1901 by a British Act of Parliament. And the monument is about the evolution of Australia and also about time, past, present, and future. And inside this dome of 1,800 pieces, tiles, enamel tiles, I was responsible for the selection of an artist, the development of a brief, and if you like, the implementation of the art, the design of the actual construction of the art. But the artist in Munstillers came up with this incredibly interesting notion, prescient. Because the space interior is about the present, it's moving, it's rotating, it has a sloping floor, sloping walls, and the way the sun moves around the circular building, it accentuates the idea of rotation. And Iman's created these two propellers, and on the one side, on the right, you can see here, is symbols from pre-colonial history, from Aboriginal communities, symbols of place and the caring for place, reflecting their values of caring for country. And he appropriated a George Bazilis figure, German expressionist figure, an aggressor, quite hostile, androgynous, that reflects effectively the termination of that culture and the replacement with a colonial culture. On the other side is this colour wheel, arranged scientifically as a progression of colour. And these two ideas rotate around an empty white space, which is, if you like, a speculation on the unknown, the future, or the great empty country, Australia. And the idea was that the future might be something to do with caring for country and the advancement of knowledge through science. And in that respect, I think it's a very interesting proposition, because I think that's where Australia should be heading and is heading from a design perspective. The other interesting thing about this building, and the outside is very much about the past, is what's written on the building. And the letters are carved very finely, and they say something. And that something came from Professor Manning Clark, who was Australia's most distinguished historian at that time, who found the words of Bernard O'Dowd, a poet commissioned to write the poem Australia at the point Australia was created in 1901. But he summarised that poem with these words, Mammon or Millennial Eden. In other words, what does the future hold? A question. Will we continue along the route of, if you like, let's say, the accumulation of short-term decisions resulting in, let's say, an affluent society, but not necessarily a true society or good society, a mammon? Or will we create a millennial Eden? And that question posed by that poet in 1901 is written on this building, commemorating Australia. And I don't know if there's any other public monument that is around nation celebration or even around the words of famous people, which actually poses a question. Usually they're aspirational statements about human values, but this one poses a question. And I think the question is still open and really the theme of this presentation. In the 7 projects that I'll show, I'd like you to evaluate whether they resonate with you, whether they're, if you like, worthy of consideration. And in doing so, these are the primary themes that are behind the thinking, behind the design that I'll present. Tectonics, emotional impact, and social purpose. By tectonics, I mean a return of understanding, building and urban science, to be able to read the building and understand it technically, to have the building meet performance requirements, principally around regenerative futures, around the idea of how we can lower carbon, for example, but not the only idea. But all of that tectonics means nothing unless it expresses itself poetically. And so its engagement with all the senses is the critical way, I think, we make architecture, how we can convert this knowledge into something meaningful, culturally relevant. The second one, emotional impact, is problematical in any virtual presentation of architecture because I think, from my experience, you have to visit and experience a building or anything, any artifact, to get a better understanding of it, no matter what's been written about it or how well it's photographed or filmed. So the ideas of time and place are central to the work. The way that light and space intersect with materials to create this emotional engagement, and the much underestimated use, the idea of use being practical today and practical tomorrow. So this is not fine art in a way. This is about applied art. This is about making something effective today, emotionally engaging, but also effective in the future. The last one, social purpose, is very important to me because the architecture I'll show is not branded. It's not self-referential. It's really about things outside of itself. It's about placemaking. It's about reflecting on the cultural history and applying that cultural history, social, economic, to today and interpreting it. So it has this hyper-focus on place and about community values. And I believe that underpins appreciating cultural and material value. And the reason why I think that's important is because buildings that appreciate in these ways, materially and culturally, tend to not be demolished, for example. They tend to be loved. And of course, that means they last a long time, and that contributes to a lower carbon future. The first project is very important to me and really would never have happened but for Brickworks in Sydney. It really is representative of what they've done with this material that has millennia of history and which had fallen into, I think, a debased use certainly in Australia right through the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and even until the early 2000s. And also, I might add, Brickworks and Glen-Gery's continuous quest to lower the carbon in the manufacturing and operational processes and have plans and strategies where they can partner with designers for a lower carbon, maybe zero carbon future. So this is a very important partnership, if you like, and this building represents this partnership. It's located in an important part of Sydney, south of the CBD and the edge of the harbour. It is a whole new precinct that came from the disused building infrastructure of not much historic value, no historic value, and created a whole new residential mixed-use precinct. Now, in thinking about this project, which was about 600 apartments and a range of scales and also some other uses, mostly retail uses, the things that impressed me in the precinct were the brick buildings. These were the adapted warehouses from the 19th century that were now commercial or residential buildings, or even becoming educational buildings. And what also is in the area and is a very important building is this business school by Glen-Gery in one of the universities. And I don't take anything away from Gary's contribution. He's given us so much, including form making, which I'm also a beneficiary of. But the important reason for not using this is the technology, because behind it is a stainless steel 316 steel frame that supports the brickwork, which has, let's say, an 80-year life for a material which has 200+ year life. And that, to me, is unsustainable technology. But these buildings go on forever and will go on forever. The other important reason was these are homes for, let's say, low to middle income people. And in Sydney, there's a fine tradition of brick apartment buildings. They're low maintenance, they have a sense of permanence, they have a sense of value, enduring value. Associating the material with the history and also the culture of apartment buildings in brick, I thought gave these buildings a certain dignity, a certain appeal. So in that sort of sense of hyper-local, the history gave us ideas, and when I say us, it was 3 directors involved, Ben Green, Chi Mellum and myself, gave us ideas on how we can create and reinterpret the language of the past into the contemporary area, contemporary design. Using new glazes, new finishes, and new brick shapes, which brickwork really developed with us and were very effective in that process. Creating articulation and special moments in the buildings with glazes. All of this, more than 70 types of bricks, came in at the same price point of panelised buildings that were the new buildings in the immediate precinct, the immediate context. And yet those panelised buildings, metal, sometimes ceramics, like, if you like, the Glen-Gery building, have a use-by date. I've had to maintain them. 30, 40, 50 years, usually about 30, they need to be replaced, whereas this detailing does not need to be replaced. So what you see here is that idea of connecting time and place, old and new, breaking the sky, creating this sense of identity across a large project by differentiated buildings. Reinforcing the urban morphology, allowing the building to shape the corners so that you can identify the geometry of the street, the purpose of the streets and blocks, and associate it with the way the building responds to it. So it's in conversation with the context. And creating landmark or legibility where we have vistas so that you can locate the precinct from, for example, a park to the north. Importantly, this site is below ground, silt, and impossible, well, not impossible, too expensive to build down. So one important design characteristic was to sleeve the building at the ground level to create entries and retail, to create vitality around the public domain, which is evidenced by this small structure, which is the entry lobby, and the way in which one development is broken up into different languages, family of languages, 4 distinct architectures, if you like, making up one complex. And we also followed that for the above-ground car park, where we sleeved it in the podium with apartments, but also where we had a new lane, we disguised the car park with this special brickwork to ventilate the structure, which is shown in these deep reveals, and of course the vibrant lane from a blighted precinct. And always looking for opportunities to celebrate the junction of the building with the sky and with the ground. And here you see the sleeved car park. And at the podium, which is forming the bulk of the building line all the way around the site, at the podium, we created a landscape which is reflective of the urban conditions. So, my apologies, so that we have this large vista to the open space to the south and to the north. And also we look onto the most important historic building. You'll also see here a community centre which comes up in the slides. It's just to the right, where these buildings frame this courtyard. And these are the sky homes that allow differentiated language, create vitality, and work well with the brick language. Here we see the entries always articulated in a glazed brick. And the community centre is the right move from an urban point of view, framing the open space. But I have to say is greenwash. It's a misuse of timber that won't survive with time, wrapping a completely conventional concrete building. So this is applique. It's not effective from an environmental point of view. So if that's brickwork, I'd like to move to a very important material, timber, which is probably the only naturally regenerative material on the planet that I can think of. Two projects, they're, if you like, cousins, and International House Sydney was the first of these projects. And it was innovative. It delivered a lower carbon building by a substantial margin, and was transformative in the design and construction industry by the way it used BIM, Building Information Modelling and Prefabrication. So it's essentially almost industrial design. We say from the file to the factory, and on site there's virtually no attendance, it's all assembled. And it's also able to be disassembled. This is a critical thing for the circular economy. I think this site is underutilised, that within 20 or 30 years it could be rebuilt, and you can literally disassemble and reuse all this building, even put it on top of another bigger building. And finally, it was Lend-Lease who took the punt commercially against all odds. The investment market said they need a 30-year investment horizon. Timber won't last, it'll burn. If it doesn't burn, it'll rot. If it doesn't rot, termites will get it, we won't invest in it. But what surprised me, that didn't really surprise me, what surprised me is the tenant market also rejected it. They didn't think that this was an appropriate material for the rent they were going to pay. But Lend-Lease pressed on without a market, and it proved to be a commercial success, which established the proposition that it could be a good investment. So here they are, the first one, the most challenging, innovative one, and then the refinements that came with Darramoo House. And here's the idea. In the area are these magnificent trees, decades old, 40, 50, 60 years old. And there's this building which is made from a tree. And the spruce pine from Austrian forests is on display. The whole construction is on display, like a kind of warehouse. And it's protected by low iron glass, so it is reasonably clear glass. Here there is no sunscreen devices because there's no heat load. But we also show the circular economy because ironbark, which is an indestructible timber, I back it in fire against concrete, against steel, against other materials. It is very strong material. It was recycled from engineering structures and also turpentines from wharf structures. In fact, these are the wharfs from which the turpentines came, and the ironbark came from a bridge north of Sydney. And that's an important part of the story, if we're talking about the circular economy, is to use elements from previous buildings, such as evidenced here. The other thing that's interesting is that Australia didn't do this, but they could have. Austria invested in their forests. They made sure that the stewardship of the forest was such that the soil was maintained. It was effectively cared for to maintain it in time. And even the trees are felled to allow animals to not lose their habitat. Time the way of felling them allows the animals to move from one tree to another. But to give you an idea, 6 hectares, which is about 15 acres of a pine forest, can grow the material of this building in 2.5 hours and sequester carbon on the way through. And this is the diagram that represents that. So 62% of this structure is carbon taken from the atmosphere. And the important point was this kit of parts, that we could actually make this effectively like Lego in Austria, put it on a ship, and then in the order it would be assembled from a truck, crane it and bolt it together very quickly. And the carbon miles from Austria by ship were lower than carbon miles from nascent industries in Australia because of the distances in the trucks, plus the industry wasn't capable of delivering this size building at this time. It's getting there. And so the timber is the interior. We use LVL to strengthen glulam beams. We have CLT, cross-laminated timber. We have obviously the recycled timbers. And it's more than just timber. We use the harbour for heat exchange to service these chill beams, and we expose all the surfaces to create the ceiling of timber and to increase height. And this is around the idea of biophilic design, because we know from evidence that human beings respond well to nature, even in here, that the sense of smell in this building is very light pine forest aroma, and the texture and the warmth of it is a stark contrast to the plasterboard and concrete buildings across the lanes. It seems like it's the past but also the future where we are. It seems like a better place to be and does enhance well-being, productivity, and reduces absenteeism. And just the idea that it's not about energy, it's not about carbon. The building's architecture is about making a part of the city by this monumental arcade, reinforcing a link to a pedestrian access to the harbour, creating active uses on the ground plane. And of course, it's a commercial building. It's about how effective it is. This is a 9x6, which is approximately 30 foot by 20 foot timber grid, and difficult to do with timber because with residential you've got minimal cross walls. And of course, all the stairs, the wet areas, the lifts are all timber. The whole thing is timber. And you can see how we had to fabricate the timber beams for penetrations, and we designed it both for today and with redundancy for tomorrow to ensure adaptability. The timber is off the ground. Timber's not good hitting the ground. And where the forces that come from the column system and the beams come to this Y-shaped column, we shape a low carbon concrete to reflect those forces and transfer the load to the piers below ground. So it has this sort of expressive quality. And you can see everywhere this idea of the tree structure from a tree in nature, and how the space is made to the harbour for pedestrian access, and how the contrast of this warm experience against the backdrop of the commercial buildings around it. Darramur House allowed us to advance our thinking, refine that knowledge. We had to complete the colonnade in a way that made urban sense, but also was distinctive, so you could find yourself, know where the two different buildings were. The addresses were distinctive. We were able to, because the first building, even though it was not pre-leased or sold, eventually leased very, very well. The developer said they could lease it 5 times over, so the budget was loosened, and we were able to make more enriching timber expression. We were able to learn from our experience and improve the environmental performance, and we confirmed that this is a commercially viable product for the commercial market, because it was not viable before this work started. It was the urban conditions which gave us a clue on how to make the building different. For example, we shaped the northern end, which is one of the gateways into the Barangaroo South residential precinct. These are all Roger Stirk Harbour Partnership towers. And we shaped it because right in front of us was a high-rise building, but to the left and right was the harbour or the city. And so when you're inside, you're turned towards the views and turned away from the building opposite, which is a residential building. The colonnade is less important in its scale here because the part of the street is not so much the connector. So we lowered it and we were able to use timber in a more expressive form. We still kept the Y columns to connect the two colonnades, and we made these special places at each end, which you can see here at the north, which you just saw, also at the south, and we're able to make, for the first time, a foyer that connects the main street to a pedestrian lane. And this is the commercial plate, a bit bigger this time, about 30% bigger and built for the same price, which is learning from that technology. And it shows you how timber enriches experience, because this two-story foyer now uses recycled timbers. Always the CLT, the spruce, when exposed, is protected, and the very durable timbers are not. And it becomes this essay in form and shape and materiality. And it has this tactile quality and this aroma and this visual sort of sensation, which is different to other materials. And we even made a work of art using the same CNC technology that made the building to show the passage of time from pre-colonial waterfront to the present. Inside, this is an example of strengthening the glue lam with LVL, laminated veneer lumber, and we used a 9x9 grid, which was more structurally efficient. And an example of the fire stair, where we used the softer timbers for wall linings and Australian hardwoods for the treads and risers. And both buildings have got photovoltaics and accessible roofs, but the first building, we couldn't afford the landscape. The second building, we could. Very similar location, very similar shape, very similar array of PVs. With the landscape, the efficiency rose by 5 to 25% depending on the season by independent university research. And that's largely because the photovoltaics are less efficient when it gets very hot and the landscape lowers urban heat island effects. So we're able to prove a theoretical piece of research with this project. And again, terminating the building, this sort of, I would say, this inviting building, a warm building compared to its neighbourhood, and also where we need them, we have these louvers to allow us to use the low iron glass, to not block views, but to shade the building. I'm going to move to industrial design and a really interesting project. It's about urban furniture. And the idea was that the furniture that Sydney had was to change. The City of Sydney decided to change the furniture. And it was a design competition and selection process. And our proposition was around the idea that furniture could help define unique identity, much like songs can define cities like New York, like Paris, like other places. And the question is whether this furniture does that and what that might be. And to embark on that idea, we first looked at what was the environment that we inherited. And there are two characteristics that I will focus on. The first is the use, this is the current furniture, derived from essentially English culture, which is the predominant colonial culture. And these garbage bins and these benches show that, these bollards show that. The other idea is this industrial heritage, particularly the very direct detailing from plate steel, the robustness, the simplicity of this harbour city's historic architecture. There was another important idea about Sydney, which is a city that has a unique characteristic in terms of design culture. And that is the architects of Sydney in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, even to the early 80s, embraced Scandinavian design. They travelled to Scandinavia. They valued the work of Lawrence and Aalto and Jacobsen. We have shops which specialise in home goods from Scandinavia. And we also had the Opera House from 1955, quintessentially Utzon. And this is unique in Australia. We even developed a type of architecture which is called the Sydney School. And a simple way of summarising it is that if the Bauhaus-derived architecture was, let's call it white architecture, the Sydney School was brown architecture. It was about bricks. It was about timbers, these sort of integral materials. It was about flowing forms and simplicity and longevity. From these ideas, we created this family of forms, bollards with and without lights. We now have a new one, which is much more elegant, I might say, than your New York ones, which are kind of truck-proof. The water fountains, the benches, the garbage bins, the tree guards, and a few lights. And this idea of Scandinavia, this idea of what the city is reflected in this dynamic, casual, flowing, fluid form. Sydney is youthful, it's dynamic, it's a busy place, it has a climate which is very attracted to outdoor living. And it has this Scandinavian heritage. And you can see it in ways here, the tree guard, and also the water fountain. We have, the water comes there and then it flows back to the drain. And we also have another one, which is a small bowl for dogs. And the garbage bin and the tree guards. And the idea that in different contexts, the industrial, severe, contemporary architecture, sometimes industrial architecture, or the more soft, organic, natural structures of the built environment. The idea of movement, these flowing forms, they're not static. The structure is not clear, it moves in a flowing way to its support. And what I really like about it is the City of Sydney conducted a survey, an anonymous survey, and it was universally distributed and had a huge take-up, and it was overwhelmingly liked, which is very difficult to do. And you can see here how I like the way the community ignores it, that the tree guard is for bikes and it's just part of the furniture, if I could say. Now, this idea of Sydney came to a focus when we won a competition to complete the eastern promenade of Circular Quay and Colonnade to the Opera House. This is World Heritage. Here you see it with the shadows of the Harbour Bridge, but it's not the only World Heritage artefact in this area. We have others, including some important heritage, Fort Denison, for example. And this project is at the start or end of this promenade to the Opera House in the city and Australia's most busiest transport interchange, where we have the Botanic Gardens on one side and our most important street in terms of residential and parliamentary buildings, linking to our port, our front door. And this is the building. You can see the end of the colonnade to a monumental stair, but mostly it's in a busy place, and this side of it is quite expressive, rotating, moving, dynamic. These are bay windows that form the apartment divisions, opaque on one side but clear on the other, and they're tilted towards the views, and they divide the apartments in glass. It was double and triple glass, so technologically it's a world first because we made it and are able to not have it distort. And also, I don't know how many buildings use this bay window to divide apartments. The main level plans, there's two levels, connect the colonnade to this grand stair that connects you to the Botanic Gardens and Macquarie Street from Circular Quay. And on the other side of the stair, we have active uses. And above, in the lower floors, where we have smaller apartments, you can see how they're shaped to take the views of the Opera House, also the views out, where you can stand in the view, as I mentioned, or across to the Harbour Bridge, or rotating back to see the city. And in cross-section, we connected these two public domains with a foyer that leads you through and down into the retail double height, 6 metre high, 20-foot high colonnade, and then above that, another super high space with restaurant activities. So harbour one side, park and opera house on the other side. And I'm frozen. Okay, so this is a section showing the scale of this grand stair and a structural soffit to express it with the different levels of accessible public interface, with the apartments starting above. I'm not sure whether I might have to use a machine. Does that rec? Here it goes. One of the things that Sydney has developed is this idea of a structural soffit being expressed. But it was first done by Utzon in the Opera House. Not many people who haven't been there will realise that you have the grand stairs to go up to, but you can also enter by vehicle or by foot. And you'll come and look up to these massive T-beams that are exposed and form the architecture of the building. And in this way, although it's very modest by comparison, we have the transfer structures reflected in the forces, shaped to reflect the forces, connecting you back to the Opera House in some kind of way. So you start or end your journey with this idea resonating. And this is this other idea of stone, concrete, and glass in a seamless transition, tilted to the view in a rhomboid shape, becoming finer and, if you like, liquid in expression. Glass is a liquid, and so is concrete. And the idea of making this continuous transformation of form through material. Here you see the connection of the colonnade with the more typical neoclassical, modern, if you like, elements becoming this element, but still aligning exactly, and the start of the stair. If I'm persistent, it sometimes works. No, not sure. My apologies. And this is a view which shows you the building in the evening and on the harbour side, on the Harbour Bridge side, with again this balcony language, and how you look up and you see this transformative geometry. One view of it is from a pedestrian walkway, but also one of the faster roads leading to the Harbour Bridge. And the idea of movement and rotation in a speeding vehicle particularly is enhanced by the architecture. You feel as you look at it when you're driving that the building's driving with you, so to speak. So it has this variety that changes with the context, the immediate context. And on the dignified side, on the Macquarie Street, where the residential address is, it becomes much calmer, much more gravitas, more similar to the buildings adjacent by comparison to this energetic circular quayside. And you can see how it completes this significant residential precinct and how it overlooks the Opera House and the gardens. I'm nearly there. There's two more projects. But Dangrove Art Storage Facility with Chi Mellum as a co-director, she was responsible for the delivery of our documents in about 8 weeks. She led the documentation team at 90% complete. Very fast. Thank you. A very fast factory, a factory to art. But our client, Judith Nielsen, is very forward-thinking, very design-sensitive. And she conceived, when we went to storage facilities, she rang me and said something like, if you design one of those for me, you've lost the job. She hated them. And she added to her brief the idea that the storage facility could be something more. It could be her place of curation for the White Rabbit Gallery, which she's gifted to the nation, really, which displays her art. It could be a place for conservation, administration of the collection. The collection goes everywhere. It's even here in New York, I think at the Met. And in effect, she contributed to the debate that's happening in the curatorial world between, to kind of characterize it simply, the white box versus the yellow box philosophies. White box being a neutral space, often in a museum, where there's a very intense focus, a scholarly focus on, say, the work of one artist. And yellow box means that you could be anywhere, let's say, and that the work can be displayed in a different context. You could have music with it, you could have design with it, you could have other things which add meaning or help you understand the cultural context in which the work was created. This was a kind of yellow box of art storage. Although it's a factory, it had a poetic dimension, and that was expressed for me in the vertical dimension. Because in the plan, in the horizontal dimension, it simply had to work. It was built to budget, built to speed, and had to house an awful lot of art. It is, I think I said, the largest collection of contemporary Chinese art in the world. So this is the vertical dimension, where around the storage is this room that's approximately 90 meters, let's say close to 300 foot, by 18 meters, or say 60 foot. It's above a certain height, it's all a polycarbonate, a beautiful light. It has natural light at either end, and is a creative place, a place where well-being for people who work there, they can come out of the storage and they can assemble and examine the work and do in this space. And it leads to an ante-room, if you like, which is here to the views and to the sun. And this is the fundamental plan idea, that when you come up to the main space, you have an assembly, pre-function space, and then you come into what we call the Great Hall. But you move from the Great Hall to the storage areas, which are part of the display, which you can enjoy. You can go down into the lower levels as part of the display. And the lowest level is the most rudimentary, the most functional, from large container services that leads to a very large lift, but also designed for a forklift truck, the large ones, to do a 360-degree turn easily, to these storage places, to these workshops, and to back-of-house low-energy technologies. Or you come through the car park to a secure spot where you enter the building and you go up the lift or the stairs to the main, if you're a visit, to the main part of this storage facility, which is this area. You come up the stair or lift and you come to a sculpture courtyard, the pre-function space. These doors are often closed in this spectacular room, but you can walk into and enjoy these storage facilities or go back down and enjoy them. And this is the idea in a more developed form, where 535 photovoltaics power this building at 22 degrees centigrade, 50% humidity, 24/7, except for this main space, which allows about a 10% variation because the art's not in there for a long time. But also this is a huge water collector. The water comes at 10 meters a second, is collected by this giant scoop, reticulated, filtered, becomes cooling, irrigation, and cleaning. And also, this scoop allows in northern light, as does this small ante-room, to complete this space. It allows in southern light, and you get the views. And in the other section, this double-skin polycarbonate, the only time where we haven't got a 100-year life, we couldn't build the glass for various technical and cost reasons. But we detailed the polycarbonate in 2 layers so that if one is damaged, you still have waterproofness, and it's all simply detailed to be clipped on and clipped off. But it also produces this remarkable light into this big room. And I should say all the services are outside the space and delivered through this steel re-entrant. The courtyard, sculpture garden, the main space from the anteroom, the northern skylight, which you can see as you enter through here, and you can see this cool light, this ethereal light, which also goes with the acoustic. It has a long wave, very good for a lot of music, designed for a lot of music, but not great for fast staccato electric guitar, for example. But it has this cathedral-like quality. And you can see where the services come in, and this is high-quality precast and very high-quality precast or in situ floor. The other way, everything's revealed. The structure, the acoustic attenuation, and how we can suspend works of art, massive sculptures. The whole room is programmable from light and sound points of view, and you can have a bridge for aerial display, which you can see up to the 30-metre high space, which has it has a purpose. There's sculptures that are around 20 plus metres high, plus we have aerial sculptures which had to be accommodated. And in the detailing, we screen the acoustics. We also can suspend things easily, and we feather the edges of these elements to create scale and a sense of the materiality, the reflectiveness of this extraordinary light. And all of the building has got bespoke steel, blackened steel and bronze furniture. It's not to be changed. It's willed that this building will remain intact and its collection for 30 years after her death. And you can see how it's used. It's performance art, it's music performance, and it's exhibition art. And from these rooms, from these doors, you go into the storage area, which is part of the experience. And this big wedge-shaped is an identifiable element in the landscape, in the urban landscape. You can see it from some distance and it locates the building with these shadows. Now I'm going to finish with two commercial buildings, mostly this one and a kind of an idea about what the future of commercial buildings might be. So this one is in Sydney's historic most important place, Martin Place, for those who know Sydney. Again, co-directed with Ben Green and also with Executive Architects Integrated Solutions. And behind it was a fairly substantial urban design project where we reshaped all the controls, and we did so for environmental reasons. So it's a story about a very special place and how to make architecture relate to that place, enhance it. For those who don't know Sydney, Martin Place is from the Parliament and Hospital area on Macquarie Street right through to our ceremonial centre, War Memorial. And we did all of this from an urban point of view, but our project is 39 Martin Place, opposite one of Sydney's most important historic bank buildings. This is one part of Martin Place, which is the symbolic and cultural heart of Sydney. And you can see it in the quality of this colonial architecture in sandstone, the material of the city. And you can also see it is horizontal, it's flat. And that's where we celebrate important events, also where most demonstrations start or finish. By comparison, the messier end is historically the commercial heart, not so much today. It's been degraded over time. This building was possibly the lowest standard building in the precinct and is to be demolished for the new building, which is under construction, which I'll show you now. And it's opposite this very important bank, finished in 1924 to 28, which was designed by Ross and Rowe. And you know when you come to Martin Place in Sydney because it has a predominance of this standard of building. And unlike New York, it's relatively unusual. And so this architecture defines the significance of this street. Our idea is to create a conversation between this building from the past to the present, a building built in the Depression to a building built during another form of economic hardship, let's say COVID-inspired hardship. And it's an interesting exercise in many ways because this is a monumental building about security. In the 1920s, with the Depression, the architecture had to be about safety. Put your money in the bank was saved. You still have to knock on this door, sound the alarm to get in. It's a magnificent interior, but it's isolated from the outside. How do you make a building conversation where the city, for good reasons, wants to make an active ground plane? And the idea was around the monumental structure we needed to span the railway system below and how we could create views from left to right of this structure, but at orthogonal directions. It had transparency and connectivity and active uses. So it's a sort of a story about two forms of monumental architectural expression, which you can see here. We are reopening the quarry to make the base out of the same stone. We're not using the ceramic tile, but we're using a much larger ceramic unit construction in a similar colour to make the base, and we're aligning all the dimensions as shown in the diagram. But we also carry that ceramic up and across the top and house this glass conservatory-like structure, which is the tower element. And we also worked out, as part of the urban design, that you could build to zero setback here and not increase any overshadowing. In fact, we are able to improve the overshadowing against the development controls through ways which were not anticipated by the development controls. But the zero setback, and they required an 8-metre setback, allows this building with the opposite building to be reflective of the significance of the street. So we have the architecture reinforcing the hierarchy of spaces in the city. South, nobody can build to this line because they overshadow. So this will always remain a significant exception to that rule. And to the principal facade, we carry through the reflection of the Doric columns, the super top floors, which in this case is glass, opposite is mostly solid, and you see the monumental structure, which in built form is used to signify the building from Martin Place, but also to allow connectivity through 3 streets connecting everything on multi-levels at the ground plane to create these active uses. There was pressure to put the plant at the top of the podium. Instead, we were able to argue that the value of this as a publicly accessible space was worth the extra cost of putting the plant in a less efficient position. And we've created this terrace which overlooks Martin Place at the podium height, and this is a typical plan. And the section, you can see how we shape the roof, how we have special double height spaces, and how we transfer the structures through these big walls that carry the load across the railway stations. And again, you can see how it resembles, but isn't the same as, the building opposite. It has the same geometry, but totally different expression. Again, on the other side, and again, an example of the modelling we're able to do, which shaped the top to deliver more solar access than the development controls permitted. Sorry, the development controls indicated through their reference design, by shaping the top to create distinctive form on either side of the building. You don't see the two sides together, and they're differentiated through the solar access plane. And where it's important, the building is symmetrical. The other thing we did is heal a degraded urban space. This is a great building, but a very poor urban outcome, partly because it was unenclosed. And now we have, through this new development control, a zero setback building which completes this square, and also this lively curvilinear building which creates a context which is more sympathetic to this eccentric circular building. So the two together now are in another conversation, I think, making this building much more valuable as a long-term asset. And then you can see up to the commercial heart of Sydney and look up to the idea of the ceramic surround to the observatory or the conservatory type office structure. And here is the level over which you see Martin Place. And this main point, before we could only identify Martin Place by this building, but now we have this wall and this podium that creates this threshold condition, re-establishing the significance and priority of this street in Sydney. And this is the square that's formed between buildings in conversation about 100 years apart. So this idea is about placemaking, about density, placing density where there's amenity without reducing the amenity of the public domain, reducing urban sprawl, as American academics have very clearly argued is a priority in our future. So it's both an urban intensification exercise and a placemaking exercise. I'd like to finish on just one slide, 2 slides, which is that design was probably 4 years ago, 5 years ago. We've had COVID. And the future of the office building is somewhat in doubt. We don't know the financial model. We're not sure that with work from home, work from anywhere, what the office building might be. So this competition posed a different financial model for the office building, which is that it's not just about leasing space, but it's about creating a sense of belonging, like belonging to a club, that you might be a single parent that has a small business that wants to work from home, but needs facilities which you can become through a club membership. This building can become available to you, facilities such as meeting spaces or even activity-based workspaces, or you can have functions there for your family, or there's medical centres, there's gymnasiums, there's food. So the idea is that the building has this identity and role to play, which is more than just an office building, and that you can both be a tenant and you can have an annual subscription that gives you, let's say, 4 weeks a year, at once a week or something, in this building. And the result is a different kind of building where the top of it, apart from planned, are these special function areas that anyone can hire once you are a member of this club, that has an outdoor area and magnificent views back onto the city. And also the first 6 or so levels are spaces that are related to this membership idea. And the foyer is not really a grand foyer about a corporation. It's really a busy place, a marketplace. And the other idea is this building is in an area of glass buildings, and its form is derived from that idiom. But also, it's a lower carbon building because every 3 floors, there's steel structure, but the in-between floors are all CLT. So it's a hybrid structure, again, lower in carbon. So that really concludes my presentation to you, and the idea that we are moving to a different world that perhaps is shaped by different values and the advancement of knowledge and the acceptance of it in policy making for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for speaking tonight. I just want to open the floor. Is there any questions for Alec whilst we've got him here tonight? Does anyone have any questions?
Well, thank you for sharing all of your projects, first of all. Extremely thoughtful, beautiful design, so I really appreciate you doing this today. But what would you say, I have probably a couple of questions, but what is your, I would say, your your favorite project? Not necessarily what you've shown us today, but what was your favorite project and why?
Well, that's an interesting question. These are all, the question is always answered. They're all my children. They're all equal. But if I'm to be truthful, there's a client who I reconnected with, a writer who I did this small timber addition to in a beautiful part of Sydney, to a historic cottage. And she sold it many years ago, but she said she'd like to see it, so we went to it. And the people let us straight in. They had conserved it. It was the first thing I ever did, actually. And it really was something that reflects these ideas and values in a very humble form. So I'm going to answer you in a curious way by saying that going back to something that was designed straight out of uni, when at Columbia we're doing big things, and it was very modest, like very modest. The whole thing would fit probably from there to there. But it was still there and pretty much intact and still quite beautiful. So I thought, and she thought, and so did the owners. So I wouldn't say it was a favourite project per se, but it was a moment in time which caused me to reflect on a lifelong of design.
Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you very much, Alec. Feel free, I've got a few beverages and also some food waiting, so thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.